Hi, I'm Courtney Morgan, and this is the Service Design Show, episode 219.
We talk a lot about design thinking on the show, right? But what about design dreaming? Turns out our dreams might be our most powerful tool yet. Stick around because today's episode is going to challenge how you think about design, impact, and even your own potential. Hi, if you're new here, welcome to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what's needed to design great services that resonate with people, push businesses forward, and honor our planet. We're joined today by Courtney Morgan, a woman of many talents. She's a design strategist, a professor, an architect, and a former consultant. But here's maybe the most interesting part. She also describes herself as a truth dealer who's passionate about building trust and empowering communities. Courtney's journey is one full of twists and turns, from navigating the corporate world to taking a leap of faith and starting her own design practice. And along the way, she learned some key lessons about trusting her instincts and following her dreams. So in this conversation, we dive deep into Courtney's unique approach to design, her passion for community-centered work, and her insights on building trust and empowering others. You will hear how dreams can actually become a powerful tool in the design process, why it is so important to trust your gut and take chances, even if that means leaving your comfort zone, how to make a real impact, even if it's just making things 1% better each time, how to build trust and empower communities through design, something that Courtney is incredibly passionate about. And also some surprising facts about Courtney, like her love for Harry Potter. You know, I've had a lot of conversations on this show about creativity and innovation, but Courtney's perspective on dreaming really took me by surprise. She talks about how we often suppress our dreams, but they can actually be our greatest source of inspiration and guidance. It's a powerful reminder to tap into that inner wisdom and let it guide our work and our lives. Whether you're someone looking for new ideas or just want to connect with your inner dreamer, I promise that this episode offers some valuable food for thought. Alright, that's enough from me. Let's hear what Courtney has to say. I'll share some final thoughts after the interview. I am your host, Mark Fontijn, and you are listening to the Service Design Show. Courtney, you shared a powerful wish with me, and that is to leave every community, client, and company at least 1% better than before. Can you elaborate what that 1% means to you?
Sure. So that 1% really focuses on causing the least amount of harm or harm reduction. So as a design strategist, I really focus on not solving any problems. I believe that the problems, at least that we are addressing with our clients, they are wicked problems. So they're really tied to our humanity, right? And so we can't solve them unless we completely rewrite who we are as human beings. And so I really try to focus on that 1%. Are you 1%? Are we moving things forward 1% every time we're working on a project? And sometimes folks will say that's not enough movement, that's not enough impact. But if we're all doing 1% and all the design strategists sort of like link up together, arm in arm, I think then we're moving things at least 10 or 15% forward. And when we think about that collective 10 or 15%, when we're talking about environmental justice, when we're talking about youth-centered advocacy work, when we're talking about placemaking and making cities happier and healthier, 10% is a lot. So we really focus on our 1% that we can do with our clients and the folks we collaborate with.
That was my next question. So what's the 1% that you're focusing on?
So the 1% that we're focusing on really shows up in multiple different intersections. I would say that our work shows up at the intersection of design and placemaking and design strategy. And so we really have a focus on the urban context and environment. I'm formerly trained as an architect, so a lot of the work revolves around the built environment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't helping folks with other things. So we do like strategic planning for neighborhoods or CDCs. We help broker conversations between, say, the government and communities. So that intersection really is, again, it's somewhat tied to the built environment or an urban context, but that's sort of where our work lies.
And there are many ways to define success and a lot of struggle to actually define success. I'm really curious, could you share with us how did you arrive at this notion of that the 1% or making things 1% better, contributing to at least 1% improvement is your definition, or at least part of your definition of success? How did you get there?
Well, I feel like I really struggled with there's just so many things that we could be doing. And I wanted to really think through what our impact was. One of my collaborators, Natalia, is really big on impact metrics. And so she wants to know, like, what are we doing? How are we doing it? And then are we following up to make sure that we're doing the thing we said we were going to do? And so I really, again, wanted to figure out what success looks like. A lot of our projects, especially when it comes to placemaking, like how can you quantify or qualify happiness, right? And we can take some surveys, we can do, observations, things like that. But what is that 1% and how are we defining it? And so that shows up, again, in multiple different ways, but that 1% seems very tangible and doable. When we think about folks who we want to work with, we do this sort of check-in to make sure that they're at least okay with that 1%. Some folks just aren't in alignment in that sense. They don't want that 1% of what we value in the work that we're doing. And so that 1%, again, is our sort of peace of mind that we know that we are having impact and we're moving things forward.
It might be a little bit abstract and sort of intangible what this 1% could be or could look like. Can you share a story of a project that you worked on where you felt that this was really well exemplified?
Sure. I think a project, it's sort of an ongoing project, I would say. But about 3 years ago, I, on a Sunday, got an email that said, "Hey, we can't meet because I can't figure out the Zoom." And that's the first part of the email that I got. And so I was very confused. I looked at who else got this email, and it was maybe over 100 folks. And I then decided, okay, let me figure out who sent me this email. I don't recognize this name. What is going on? And why can't 100 people figure out a Zoom? And so from there, I realized that it was community members that somehow someone told someone to include me on an email. And they were trying to figure out how to organize and advocate for themselves within this huge, massive master planning project that's happening in Baltimore, really around the infrastructure that came out in the 70s. And these folks were really struggling to find a digital space to convene and to connect and to really find a space to collectively share their vision for their neighborhood. And so after I read through what had seemed like 3 weeks worth of emails, I said, "Hey, I've got a Zoom. When do you all want to meet?" And from there, I worked with these community members for about 3 years. And there was a lot of challenges just in that process. And again, at this point, Mark, it's not even a project. It's just these people are trying to advocate. They're trying to organize. They're trying to get a say and a voice in this process. And so during those 3 years, I mean, it was every Friday for the first 2 years, just sharing space, allowing space and a platform for folks to air their grievances, to talk through their experiences. And then from there, we decided to convene in person, to have events. And then from there, we decided, okay, in order for us to really be taken seriously by our local, state, and federal government, we need to organize and formalize our organization. So we um, started a nonprofit, and then we had a say. And finally, we had the opportunity. We were ready when another major project came and was starting in Baltimore City. And we were able to say, hey, we have a nonprofit. We want to be able to be a part of this process. And so for me, that was success because although it took 3 years to get to this point, the community now has a vehicle to be able to be on the applications for major planning projects. They are decision-making entities within the built environment. And so that for me is a really huge success. Again, it's not necessarily, I would say, a project. No one paid me to do that. It wasn't a client. It was an email that I randomly got years ago on a Sunday. And that for me is success. In such an intangible way, because now community feels like they can advocate for themselves within these larger planning processes.
I'm curious why you say that it's in an intangible way. It really sounds very tangible the way what they are able to achieve right now, right?
Yeah, well, I think I'd say it's intangible because or at least it seems intangible for them still. When it comes to, I would say, the everyday person, when you talk about planning projects or master plans, the actual like capital improvement projects, the day where you cut the ribbon with the mayor and the governor and we take the pretty picture, we're years away from that. And so really trying to help them navigate through the next set of years, right? So not only advocating in the planning process, but then also holding the different entities accountable is really, it's challenging and it takes a lot of work. And so I think right now for them and sort of for us, we're still in the planning process. So it feels a bit abstract, I would say. Maybe not intangible, but still
And the 1% doesn't show up here as you've given a community a voice that hasn't had quote unquote official voice in a process that is huge, takes a very long time. Like that's the 100% maybe, and then you've helped to nudge this in a better direction. Is that a good interpretation?
Absolutely. And I think the thing that's significant about this nonprofit, because there's a million and one of them, is that this is just community members. A lot of the times, the entities or the nonprofits that actually have a say in the planning process, they have some sort of institution that's tied to them. This is 100% grassroots. Your neighbor down the street who doesn't necessarily have any formal training, but has lived experience, which makes them an expert in what's going on. They have a seat at the table. They can be on the board and they can, make decisions.
You mentioned lived experience. How important is stepping into that in your work?
I'd say it's one of the most important things. That lived experience is really important because in order to build trust and to broker power, I need to be able to advocate for the folks who know what's going on, right? And so those are the folks who, with the lived experience, a lot of the times, as someone who is formally trained, as someone who is an educator, sort of institutions, they have a way of working, I would say, and a process and a workflow that they like to follow. They want the person with all the degrees to be the person who's leading and making decisions. And so as a practice, we've decided that that's not the case. I don't know what it's like to live on your block. I need you to tell me. I need you to also co-create with me, because at the end of the day, when I leave, I get to go back to my block. And is your block going to be any different? Is it going to embody what you envision for your block? You have to be a part of the process, and I have to value what it is that you're bringing to the table. And again, I've got to share that power with you. And so that for us, that sharing of power shows up in the decision making. And it's not just what color do you want to see on the wall, right? Or, do you
Hmm.
want this here or this there? It really is having a say in everything. Is a built environment implementation the right thing? Do we need to build a new building? Do we need to build a new park? What I don't know any of these things, and so it takes a little bit longer to value that lived experience. But we don't move and we don't design, we don't do anything until we've checked in with folks with that lived experience, and they one accept that we're a part of their team, and then we take our direction from them.
How do you do that? How do you get them to accept you as part of their team?
I just mentioned that. That's
Yeah.
the 2 years ahead of
Uh-huh. Yeah.
it's showing up and not having an ask, right? You just give. Like, how can I be of service? You're just around, right? Really supporting them. And again, it takes a lot of time, but it puts you in a position that you've built the trust with them. You're scrappy, you're helping, you're again following their lead. And then you do we do these sort of capacity building, I would say exercise, but they're sort of stealth, right? So I might mention like, oh, this came across my desk, right? This grant opportunity. I think this might address something that we were talking about casually, or oh, did you see that these folks are building this over here? And then if you need me to help, or you want me to start a document, or you want to talk to them, the people who are administering the grant, let me know. Would you want to have a conversation with the folks who have been successful and have built this thing already? So really, again, it's just being of service. I don't ask for a project. I don't ask for any money. I don't submit a proposal until we have a relationship. And Mark, that is a very different business model. And it is challenging when I talk to other business people and they're like, you got to pitch, 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 pitch. Like, you're 2 minutes in the elevator with the owner of whatever, or this developer. What are you going to say? I'm going to talk about the weather. I'm going to try to get a laugh. I'm going to try to tell them a joke. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to start trying to sell my services or talk to them about why what we do is important. Because I think we've got to build that trust first before you know that I'm the person who you want on your team.
So in this example in Baltimore, was it right?
Mm-hmm.
You almost stumbled into this community, at least it sounds so. Have you, in the recent years, have had examples where people did approach you with a challenge, like maybe an organization or a company or foundation asked you, hey, Courtney, we want to achieve XYZ. Can you help us? Where you didn't have the opportunity to sort of first invest in building trust with a community. Did you have that? And if so, how did you approach that?
I would say I've had maybe an adjacent experience. We had someone reach out to us via our website, which, I mean, Mark, that's happened like twice, right? Like, no one is clicking on our website and then saying like, hey, we'd love to, work with you. And so I was a bit hesitant when I got that email, but the email essentially was from an organization that's out in Colorado, and they wanted to work on this project in Baltimore. And we were recommended to them through the city. And then when I looked at the person from the city, it was someone who we've never worked with. And so again, I've got my reservations, right? Like, I'm just not sure. So what we did was we just had a series of conversations. We did a vibe check. Like, I want to know if you understand how we work. and how we sort of not only how we work, but like what we value. And so again, it was a series of conversations with this organization, and it did feel like it was an alignment. They shared a lot of their work. They told us who they were. And then again, at this point, I would say I'm the one with the local expertise, right? And so we had a few conversations around how they work, how we work, and those conversations again were very casual. And at the end of the day, I think going back to what I said earlier, it seems like the work that we do is reading as community centered. So this was the first time that we had someone who we've never worked with before in an agency that we've never worked with before, see our work, get it, and then recommend us. And so we're trying to, I would say we're still in the process of that. We're trying to broker that relationship with this Colorado based entity.
Listening to your story and the position you take within, I don't know if even project is a good word, but let's use project. How do you see yourself, and how do others see yourself? Do you see yourself as a designer? Do you see yourself as a community member? Like, tell us a little bit more about that.
I feel like for me, design is a tool. And I think even in my formal education as an architect, and also my formal education as a design strategist, I wasn't necessarily interested in the sort of glitz and glam of the design, right? Or how well designed something is. I think I was more interested in the reception or the experience of the user, of the people. And so I think I don't know if I don't know that I lead with design, right?
Hmm.
I lead with I can have conversations, and we can at least create a space and an environment in which we can have conversations, and we can also collectively dream. So I would say I was going to use a reference, but I'm sure you don't know
Tell
this
me now.
reference.
Now you made me curious.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, I'm really into comics and graphic novels. So Kipo is a comic that I'm really into. They have a show on Netflix, and there's this water sort of creature that uses its body to seep into other beings, and then they sort of create this dream world. And so they use their liquid or their fluid to be able to encapsulate that person's mind and then make them dream whatever they want to dream. I don't do it in a negative way, but I would say that I am sort of that water or that liquid being, in the sense of I'm interested in people having collective dreams together. And so I want to create that environment in which we have a safe, brave, and accountable space to have conversation, then get to that point where we're dreaming together. So I wouldn't say that I'm a community member, because I also don't want my vision and my views to show up, or my perspective to show up. I really do just want to provide the tools and the space for folks.
So let's dive deeper into the water of collective dreaming.
Yeah.
What is it that you actually do? Like, what are the skills and qualities that somebody needs to have? Like, let's say we're super inspired by what you're doing, and we're like, yeah, this is what I want to do as well. What do we need to master?
I don't know that I'm a master in anything, Mark. So that one's a tough one. But I would say that I'm open to allowing for other people's vision to lead the way. And so a lot of the times when we go to school, especially whether it's for design or art, we really feel like our vision is the vision. Our ideas should be what's front and center. And I think I'm really great at being in the passenger seat. Sometimes if I could, I would love to sit in the back seat. I'd love to really yield that power. Like, I am really excited about educating and empowering other people to do the thing. So I would say some of the things maybe that I do well is I like to say I'm a world creator, right? So I like to, again, create these worlds, these environments in which people feel comfortable enough to dream. So you've got to figure out, how do you do that? How do you make people feel comfortable? And how do you get them to share their dreams? Because those are their secrets,
Mm-hmm.
right? This
Mm-hmm.
is like I can't tell you this thing because you might think I'm crazy, but I want people to tell me those things. So I do a lot of facilitating as a professor, as an educator. And in that, I really try to break down those barriers. I like to tell my students all the time, I failed classes, right? So again, when you say master something, I'm like, I don't know. I failed classes in high school, in undergrad, in graduate school, right? Like I failed classes. Um, so I don't know that I've mastered things, but I'm willing to iterate on things, right? And I understand, again, it's a process. And so I think it's mastering the building the environment, it's the facilitating and being iterative for sure.
Okay, fair enough. We are all learners, and it's life is all about becoming anyway. But what would you say are like two or three things you've learned by maybe failing to create these safe spaces and to tapping into those dreams? Like, what is it that you maybe now do more deliberately and intentionally than you did, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago?
I would say it's the little things, right? Again, in order to build that trust, whether it's between the client or my team, we have to do these like check-ins, right? We are living in a time where there's so many unknowns, there's so many things that are happening. Um, Honestly, Mark, I if this call was last week or the week before, I don't know that I would have been able to have this conversation or any conversation, to be honest.
So for
Last week was a
perspective, we're recording this around the time that the new president got elected in the US. Yeah.
yes, and that last week was a very uncertain week. And so what I had to do was really think through, we're not as close as I thought we were in the sense of like reality and perspectives, right? We don't have a shared reality, and there are still a lot of people who are in pain and are hurting, right? And so I think I do check ins with my team and with my clients because I am invested in them. So that's one thing that I always do. And that check in is, it's a I try to allocate maybe 5 minutes for that. Sometimes people have a lot on them and they really just need someone to listen. And so sometimes that turns into 15 minutes, sometimes that turns into 30 minutes. And then maybe we only have 30 minutes left in the meeting, which means we've got to do some asynchronous work, right? And being flexible and allowing people to bring their humanity into the space is really, really important. So that's something that I do differently that a lot of people do not do. And I would say I just don't take myself that seriously anymore. Like, I went to pre-med school. I wanted to be a surgeon. I am not a surgeon. Everything we're doing here it can take however long it needs to take, right? No one is dying because
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have a voice or a say in a project, right? So I don't take myself that seriously. So I tell a lot of jokes, Mark. I don't know if they're good jokes or not, but I feel lighter. I feel like the people who I collaborate with, they feel lighter, and I take the time to invest in people.
It sounds so radical. Investing time in
It seems
people.
it seems I feel like when it comes to business, I feel like we've been, especially in America, we're just like efficiency, 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 right? Like we've got to, like, if we've got a 30-minute meeting, we've got to pack it all the way out. And I don't like that. You cannot treat people that way. I'm not going to say what meeting it is, but I attend a monthly meeting that's supposed to be 2 hours. It ends up being 4 hours Mark, it is unreasonable. There's no water, there's no food. It's just awful. There's no rhyme or reason. It feels like there's no structure at all. These people are not facilitating, right? And again, like allowing space for people to talk and share, but then shepherding them.
Yeah, because somebody could interpret that like, you know, if 2 hours turns into 4 hours and we're having a lot of fun, then that's a
Oh,
great
we're
thing,
not
but,
having a lot
right?
of fun.
Well, that's so taking all the time that we need is maybe like there is a nuance to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about
Yeah.
efficiency. You're not you have a different perspective on efficiency,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not doing as
Yeah,
much as we
absolutely.
can.
It's not. And then again, I want to go back to that 1% mark. So if I have that 1% in mind, again, we can take 3 months, we can take 6 months. I know by the end of that time, we're going to get to that 1%, right? And these are not the kind of work that we do, they're not easy topics or subjects. We're currently working on this project where we're trying to connect two pretty large parks and do a multimodal pathway in between. And folks want to talk about parking. They want to talk about bike lanes. They want to talk about buses. They want to talk about trains. They want to talk about transit. And they're upset and, home value, things like that, property value. Like folks, they want to know like who's coming into my neighborhood. What is it going to look like? What are you doing? Why are you doing? And these are very difficult conversations to have, right? And I want not only folks who are in agreement to show up. And so when folks do show up and they voice their opinions and they share their lived experience, I really do try to honor what it is that they're saying. And then again, we've got to move forward 1%. So how do you then take the conversation from, no, I don't want bike lanes on my street to, okay, well, how do you envision your street, right? And so it's this really collaborative approach versus me against you. And again, I feel like unfortunately, in the American context, we are yes and no, right? You're on this side or you're on that side. And I don't believe it's A or B. It's a C. The moment that a B shows up, then we can't go with A or B. It has to be C. We have to now envision a collaborative and a new way forward because A and B are clearly not the right ones because we have A and B people. So now we've got to all become C people to move forward.
Have you ever been in a situation where you I don't know if you had a stake, but you had an opinion about whether or not it should be A or B, and what do you do if like I can imagine it becomes hard
Oh,
to advocate for sort of neutrality when you do have a perspective on what good looks like. Have you been in a situation like that?
I have, but Mark, again, I don't know how I was built this way, but I'm very like collaborative to the point where like even in my household, I'm very collaborative. Like I don't want again, I don't want to have the only say. It feels very unnatural to me to be the only person saying that this is the thing, right? Like I cannot do that. And so I would say like even on the team dynamics, right? So I own the firm, I have to make the final decision. And even in that sometimes it's not especially when we have new collaborators come in, they say like, oh, well, are we going to vote on it? Or I don't want to tell you all what direction to take it. And I say, no, we're going to have a conversation and then we're going to actively real time co-create a new way forward.
Hmm.
And so for me, it allows me peace to understand that everybody's on the same page. Everybody has ownership, and then therefore everyone will be co-stewards of whatever it is we come up with.
Where do you find the patience to go through that journey?
I don't know that I have patience, Mark, but I'm very interested in other people doing this collective radical dreaming and thinking and shaping. So we have an 8-year-old and a lot of I'd say a lot of the the conversations, I won't call them complaints. A lot of the conversations that we have about our son with other educators are that he has an opinion or he wants to give an iteration or a feedback or an alteration to what he's being asked to do. And again, I just learned that I can actually have a say in my life 4 years ago, Mark. So he's at 8 and he already knows that. And that is,
Good luck with
to me,
puberty.
that I know, but I feel like it's such a thing because our minds are these to me, I think our minds honestly have the ability to create entire worlds, right? Again, going back to the graphic novels, the fantasy, the work that I do, everything that we see that is actually built by humans, someone had to think about that. So that came from a mind, right? And so why would I want to change our son's mind from thinking that way? And why would I want to now put up barriers in my mind again? No, I did that for, a couple of decades. And now I can see and now I know. And so, I mean, I feel like nothing that we're trying to do is like building, colonies on Jupiter. So everything can take time. Everything will happen in this lifetime. Everything that we're working on, again, can, it can take the time that it needs to take. I don't know where I got that patience from, Mark. That was your original question. Um, I don't know. I feel like it just came to me. Maybe that's my superpower, my patience.
Well, that is a superpower for sure, and especially when you're a parent. Speaking from first-hand experience here, you mentioned dreaming quite often,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
collective dreaming. Like, that's not a word we use on a day-to-day basis. What is your relationship to dreaming, and why do you think it has gotten such a prominent role in your life?
I think I usually tell this story about, me coming from this long line of dreamers. And I've sort of written it down and talked about it. But what I will say is that I feel like I've come from a long line and long history of people who were dreamers, but I don't think that they realized that they were, right? A lot of the times we talked about earlier, like the celebration of moments and accomplishments and achievements, right? And so I think sometimes when you're stuck in doing the thing, you don't actually realize, oh, this is happening in real time, or this is what it actually is. And so for me, when I look back, when I, reflect, I think about my parents who immigrated to the US in the 80s because they wanted to pursue a better education. Or I think about my grandparents who lived in the countryside of Jamaica and then decided that no, they want to like move to the big city. So they moved to Montego Bay, and they just, they had this idea, they talked about it with their partners, and then they said, okay, I'm going to do this thing, right? And so it feels like you need at least one person, right? Some confidant you can sort of share those secrets with, right? And what I'm really interested in is not only sharing that secret with just one person, let's start sharing it together. Like, let's start sharing it with multiple people, because then again, we can go from that 1%. If I'm doing 1% and the person next to me is doing 1% and the person next to me is doing 1%, if I can get 10 people in a room, now we've got 10% moving all at once, right?
Yeah, okay. So you've reflected and you've sort of looked at your family history and seen that there were definitely signs of dreamers. Um, when you're sort of uh, in your last days of your life and you'll be looking back
Mm.
on your own life, what's the thing that you feel you or maybe the people around you will say that you've been dreaming about? What's your dream?
I, my natural reaction is dreaming with other people. Like again, like I feel like I grew up in this very communal space, right? I always had family around. I always had family friends around. I have so many aunts and uncles that aren't really my aunts or uncles, but they're people who, again, like have this common value, this shared dream, if you will, of again moving to this country, creating a life that you want, and it seems like a very natural thing to do. Um, and so I want to, if I okay, radical thinking here, Mark. Radical thinking. If I'm privileged enough to live to say 80, my grandmother just turned 80. If I'm privileged enough um, to live till 80, I really hope that I have a collective of like radical collective dreamers. And it is a thing that we practice as designers. It's a thing that we practice as community members, just as people of
Mhm.
the world, right?
Mm.
We really are okay with sharing our dreams with other people and collectively moving it.
Yeah, I love it. Again, it's so easy to talk about our craft in terms of soft skill, hard skills. Uh, but dreaming is, again, isn't part of the common vocabulary, right? So, like, what would you say to us, the listeners of the Service Design Show, people who are doing and striving to create a better world each and every day? Like, how do we incorporate? How do we become better dreamers, or how do we incorporate
Mm.
dreaming into our practice?
Maybe for me, I feel like our dreams are, it's our honest and true thoughts, right? Because we don't really have a say or any control over it, right? And I do think that we can probably feed our subconscious, right? So I'm very intentional about the content that I consume. And for better or for worse, they can create these silos, right? So again, I talked about this shared reality. Like for me, shared reality or what's popular culture is anything that shows up in a graphic novel, or maybe in a cartoon, or very I would say like hyper niche, like urban design, things like that. Those are things that I'm always listening to. Those are things that I'm always watching, reading. So anything design related or anything sort of centering like creating worlds or storytelling, that's my jam. I can do it in my sleep, outside of my sleep. So I think we have to, if we say we want to do these things, then those are the things that we have to spend our time on, right? And then you'll start to see that your dreams start reflecting these things that you're passionate about. I don't think that the work that you do should be separate from your passion. And I know that that comes from a very privileged place, right? But I think we can become better dreamers if we do what we actually want to do. So what we're actually passionate about. What's that one, like, money is not an object. If you could do whatever you want to do, whatever that thing is, that's the thing that you should be like nurturing and growing. And you can do that by consuming content around it, talking to people, listening to things, spending some time on it. Sometimes I'll even allocate time on my calendar to like read or pick up a new book or watch a show, you know,
Hmm.
those things.
I didn't expect this conversation to turn into an exploration of dreaming, but I like it. Uh,
Yeah.
what's when you share this story with people and you talk about collective dreaming, like what are some misconceptions that you hear? What are some what's some prejudice that you hear around dreaming?
Oh, Mark, I don't know if you've noticed, but I look very youthful. Yes, right. So I do get that a lot. So a lot of people think, who's this young person just, so whimsical, so, like fluid or like woo in their thinking, right? But what they don't understand is that collective dreaming doesn't mean that you have an idea and you don't study and you don't build up that expertise, right? It's being accepting of this idea and then putting in the work collectively to move it forward, right? And so a lot of the times when I do speak to folks, they think, oh, well, I don't know, Courtney watched a show and then she wants to build this thing now. But that's not what actually happens. I might watch a show, I might read a book, and then I go and do deeper research. I listen to a podcast. I do the legwork, I do the research, I talk to other people. Are you also thinking about this? Are you also curious about this? And then I will sometimes, honestly, I'll spend 2, 3 years on just an idea because I want to become an expert in it, right? Whether it's like houseplants or,
Mm,
cultivating an edible garden in the middle of a
mhm.
city, right? I'm going to read books about it. I'm going to follow Instagram accounts about it. I'm going to, again, consume content. I'm going to learn passively and intentionally about that thing. And then again, we're constantly all doing this thing together. I want our thoughts to be interlinked. And it's more active than people think it is. I think again, people they see me, they think, oh, who's this young person? She doesn't know anything. But actually,
Mm. The really interesting thing around this for me is that uh, there is so much value in having better dreams. So
Mhm.
we can make plans all day, we can make strategies all day, but the question is, where are they leading to? And it's most likely not the fault or the lack of management theory or stuff like, but it's, I think right now we're in the age where it's mostly lacking better dreams, right? Where are we heading to?
Absolutely, Mark. I think, and I don't, and I talk to my husband about this all the time. I'm not sure where in society we decided that dreaming and being curious is not a good thing. And then we show up in our public school education or whatever education we're
Mm-hmm.
getting. And we're taught to put down this dreaming, this curiosity, this sort of creativity, and how it shows up in this subconscious and almost very natural way. We're told to put that down. Dreams are dreams. This is reality. We're not getting into that. Like that is sort of an image. It's almost a sign of immaturity to talk about dreams, and I think that that's a very false idea, right? I think that the dreams that we have, again, I think that those are our true passions. So it's our true conversations. It's our truth showing up. And so we've gotta analyze those things and make sure that our dreams are healthy and happy and are really pushing
Instead
us
of
forward.
suppressing them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppressed
I,
mine for decades, y'all.
I don't we I don't know if we explicitly discussed that, but what happened in your life that sort of stopped you from suppressing your dreams?
I think I typically will share, like, even with my students and with collaborators, I have anxiety and I didn't know what it was. And Mark, when I say I have anxiety, I mean I had crippling anxiety, and I grew up in a time in which we did not talk about that. We didn't talk about it. It's just these nerves or these feelings. But it got to the point when it flared up really bad when I was in undergrad. I used to have panic attacks. I couldn't drive. And at the time, I was commuting to school. And so I had to figure out different ways and different support systems to really cope with that. Again, not really addressing this very clinical thing that was happening, right? And so what I didn't realize until it brought me to a halt was that my mental health and the health of my mind and my brain was very important. So one of the things I didn't mention during COVID is that I was hospitalized. I had I usually get these really crippling migraines, and it just so happens this one day on a Saturday I had a really bad migraine that I just couldn't shake, and I called my doctor's office. They weren't available. They told me to go into the ER. And long story short, it was during COVID. I also went to a hospital that's known not necessarily for being equitable or kind to Black and brown folks, but it was the closest hospital and I was in a lot of pain, Mark. So I think it was maybe 4 or 5 hours later, I still hadn't seen anyone. And I was told that I started screaming and I fainted. And then they finally took me to the back. And Mark, all I needed was ibuprofen. That was it. I didn't need anything heavy, but again, we're talking about sort of the epicenter of the opioid crisis and things like that. So they have their processes and the way that they want to work through things. But after that, I really felt like my mind is the most important thing. And so during that time, so after that, I really had to rebuild not only my self confidence, but I had to build back my mental health. And so there was just COVID was just such a very stressful, it's like a pressure cooker, right? It's such a stressful time. And there were so many things that were happening. I mentioned I was working full time. Our son was going to school full time. I was going to school full time. I was trying to volunteer. So after being hospitalized, I decided to quit my corporate job and do something for me for once that was something that came natural to me. I grew up in a household where we always volunteered. We went to soup kitchens. We did street cleanups, things like I've always been in the community working, being of service. And I said, okay, clearly what I've been doing up until this point has brought me to this halt. I was at mentally, I was at the lowest of low, Mark. And I said, if I'm going to rebuild, how am I going to rebuild it? What am I going to actually spend the little bit of clarity that I have and mental power that I have? What am I going to do? And at that point, because I was so low, I said, I'm going to do what comes natural to me. I'm not going to do what anyone else has told me to do. I'm going to do what I know makes me feel like a great person. I'm going to do what I know is the right thing to do, regardless of what society says. And I talked to my husband about it and he said, yeah, sure. It's like, if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. We need you here. So, if that means quitting your job, if that means starting your own practice, if that means leaning into your dreams and really exploring your mind and spending time with yourself, then do that thing. And so that's sort of, I would say that's the rebuilding part, Mark. And it's been a very radical, wild dream. We live in Brooklyn, New York now. That also came from that stream of, let's just try something that we want to do. So we live in Brooklyn. I teach at Parsons now. If you asked me if I wanted to do those things 5 years ago, I would have said no. I own my own practice. If you had said I wanted to do those things 5 years ago, I would have said no. So all these things are coming out of that. I'm painting, I'm creating, doing sculptures. Yeah. Just doing things that are satisfying, but also make me happy. I talked about happy and healthy cities. I want to be a happy and healthy person. And so I'm just leaning into those.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's quite profound and quite intense. I'm happy to hear the place where you are right now. One thing I would love to hear from you is what lesson would you be able to give us from this experience so that we won't have to first be hospitalized in order to uncover our true self? What do you, I don't know what maybe you tell your students or your kids or maybe even your clients. What do you wish somebody would have told you, maybe?
Ooh, there's so many things. But I think it goes back to this playing an active role and being active in the decision making and active in the life that you live. I think in a way, obviously I'm here and I am who I am because of my environment and my upbringing. And I do think that my parents did what they thought was best. And they did what they knew at the time, right? And so I didn't necessarily grow up having a say and being a decision maker. And so for the folks out there who are saying like, oh, Courtney's talking from a place of privilege, or that would be really nice, but I've got bills to pay, or, like I really don't know where to start, or I don't know how to do this thing. I would say I too, lived in that sort of space for a very long time, for decades. And there is a moment where your true self, I would say, reveals itself to you. And again, I feel like it really comes up in your dreams. Like, what are you dreaming about? That's yourself telling you, like, hey, you actually do like doing this thing, or hey, you're really interested in this thing, right? This life that you sort of live in your subconscious is the life that is fighting to sort of come out. So I would say,
Mm.
listen to your intuition, listen to your dreams, listen to your mind. If something doesn't sit right with you, then it doesn't sit right with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think society tells us to sort of sit with the discomfort and being uncomfortable a lot. And I'm not going to say that you shouldn't. I don't feel comfortable 100% of the time, but there's going to be a moment, or hopefully there will be a moment, where your subconscious and your true self reveals itself, and you've got to listen to it. Because if not, then the universe or the world will continue to bring you back to that point where it's trying to tell you to listen, to listen, to listen. And those lessons that you're learning and those experiences that you're going through, that struggle, you keep going through it because you're not listening. You're
Mm.
not learning the thing that you're supposed to learn. So I would say listen to yourself. And then also spend some time reflecting. So for my students, I require them to do a studio journal, which is 30 minutes a week. Put it on your calendar, allocate it however you want, but you must sit with yourself and check in. I would say that, again, like mental health is not something that I grew up talking about. As designers, we're expected to create on a dime and to solve, resolve, address, where we've got to be creative, right? We've got to do all these things for society, for ourselves. And I'm only successful if I do that, right? There's so many things that are actively going on in our mind. So allocating 30 minutes at least a week to just sit and reflect. And that studio journal assignment it could be anything. I tell my students, I do this for my graduate and my undergraduate students. The undergraduate students are usually like, you want me to do what? Like, I don't have time for this, Courtney. It's like, no, I want you to just sit, doodle, write a reflection, take a photo, watch the sunset, just talk out loud. Whatever it is, I want you to check in with yourself for 30 minutes. And it is one of the best practices. You mentioned earlier, Mark, that you have a journaling practice and that you journal daily. I don't know that I can do it daily, but I do it at least once a week, where I want to sit with myself and really sort of reflect and check in, like, hey, how's it going? Like really figure out, like, how do I feel this week?
Mm-hmm.
How do I want to feel next week? And really taking that time to check in.
I think we are almost wrapping up, but what I'm going to take away already from our conversation is, one, I'm going to add to my journaling practice the question, what am I dreaming about? Or what have I dreamed about? And we still try to do family dinners, at least, I don't know, 5 times a week out of 7, and have this conversation at the dinner table with my kids and my wife. Like, what have you been dreaming about lately? Because I think making it explicit and asking that question sort of gives permission to let these dreams surface. So at least that's already what I'm taking away. Courtney, the way we like to wrap up the conversations here on the Service Design Show is with a question, because I believe that it's much more interesting to look for better questions than the right answers. What's a question that you'd like us to ponder on after we're done listening to this episode?
Mark, this one's hard. It's really hard. One question. I I mean I can keep it pretty general maybe. What are you curious about? Just and I think you can go as deep as you want on that, but what are you really truly curious about? And I would say if you have a hard time answering that question, then I would spend some time being curious, right? I feel like there's ambition, there's success, there's making it, there's winning, right? But what are you actually truly curious about? What do you yearn to know? And I think if you don't have something that you're yearning to learn about, then I feel like maybe you're not active mentally. And we want to stay active mentally.
Thank you for that question. And I'll give a bonus exercise. If you can't come up with anything that you're curious about, you should be curious about why you're not curious about anything. So there is that's the loophole. That's the loophole. Courtney, thanks so much for joining us on the Service Design Show and having this conversation, and sort of reigniting my appreciation for dreaming and dreams. This will be a fun journaling exercise for me, and I think for a lot of people who are listening to this show. So thanks again for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Mark.
This conversation really highlighted the importance of listening to our inner voice and trusting our instincts. It's something I've been reflecting on a lot lately, and I encourage you to do the same. I was also struck by Courtney's passion for community engagement and her commitment to making a positive impact. For me, it's a powerful reminder that service design at its heart is about making a difference in people's lives. So, if you are feeling stuck or uninspired, I hope that this episode has given you a little push to follow your dreams and make a positive impact on the world. Thanks again to Courtney for joining us today. It was an honor to have her on. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, you can do me one big favor. Click the like button on this video and maybe even leave a short comment if you haven't done so already. Not to feed the YouTube algorithm, but to let me know whether or not you're enjoying the things that we're doing. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and celebrate that by joining us today, you have directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So, from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontijn, and I look forward to having you with us again for a new conversation on the Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.